So, my name is Bree Smith, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at a company called Return Home. We specialize in a service called Terramation, and it is an end-of-life alternative to burial and cremation, and we transform human remains into soil.
That is really awesome. What really throws me off about this entire thing is how many people are against it right now. Or that seems like there's a lot of organizations and a lot of people that they're actually saying that it's not natural. It's not like a natural way to bury somebody, which is just weird because that's what we used to do, hundreds of years ago. This is what happened, right?
It's one of my favorite things to hear because I have extensive experience otherwise. Part of my ending up at Return Home is that I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer. So I have been embalming and cremating people for over a decade, and I have a lot of opinions on the differences in the disposition methods. And when people say ours is not natural, I would just like to have a conversation with them because I feel like once you see it and you understand it, it's actually science as old as time. We've just optimized the environment in which it takes place.
Can you explain to me what embalming is?
Oh, absolutely. So, essentially, it's the disinfection and preservation of a human body after death. And what we do is we use the vascular system. So we pull a artery and a vein up from usually the carotid area of your body or maybe the femoral area. And we inject embalming fluid, that's formaldehyde, into the artery while draining blood simultaneously from the vein that we're draining from, and so we're replacing blood with chemical.
Hmm. And why was it done this way? Well, I mean, what
That's a
happened?
good question. Yeah, yeah. So, preservation methods have existed throughout history. Of course, what first comes to mind for most people is mummification. So there have been death rites throughout history where these types of things have taken place. But embalming, as it is known in the United States today, was actually first really seen in mass in the Civil War. So during the Civil War, people were traveling very far to defend their home and their land. And what happened was they would be in a place that was thousands of miles potentially from where they were born, and they would want to return to where they were born to be buried with their family on their property, however that looked. So essentially, people were being preserved at that time for shipment home for funeral services. But one little known fact is that they used to actually have sometimes a person set up like on the battlefield or next to the battlefield, not on it per se, but in the area where people could see their work.
Hmm.
Embalming really took off because if you were a good embalmer, people wanted to come to you and they would pay you for that service. So really the funeral industry in the United States is only, I don't know, like a couple hundred years old at max, and how we know it just since the Civil War with embalming, really.
It's wild. I don't know what the figures look like, but I imagine the funeral industry, the death industry is making a lot of money
It's a
with.
billion-dollar industry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And it's just for people's, if they don't know, what is the price comparison for something like a natural organic reduction process versus embalming versus the other ways?
Yeah, well, it depends on your region. Where you're from really determines the cost of the funeral services you can expect. I'm in Seattle area, so for us, it's quite high. I would say at my previous firm, if you didn't own the cemetery property and you chose a full service traditional with embalming in a casket, you're looking at upwards of $20,000 easily,
Hmm.
and much more. Usually, it was around 30,000 probably for most. And then, of course, for cremation, it's kind of a you get what you pay for scenario. In the industry, there's been a real race to the bottom on cremation to who can charge the least amount for the service, which isn't a bad thing for families unless you need care at all. There is a lot of value in the funeral professional, and part of that value is in how resourceful we are, how we can help you walk the grief journey. There's a lot of things that we can do to help families. So, in Seattle area, it might cost you $795 for a cremation, but you'll get nickeled and dimed, and you're not getting help with your loss. So for us, the charge is $5,000. We are a full white glove service. We bring people into our care. We invite families into the facilities to, participate and get their hands on their loved one. We really encourage the hands that love you in life to continue loving you in death. It means a lot to us. Because we've really ripped that away from people in a lot of ways. And it's actually not natural to not interact with your dead. But in short, we're kind of right in the middle of what you can expect from a cremation as far as price to that traditional burial, and maybe even on the lower end of the middle.
Do you see, I mean, since it's such a new industry, do you see the prices in the future beginning to maybe reduce a little bit?
I don't know, so what I like to kind of tell people is that a cremation lasts about 90 minutes to maybe 2.5 hours tops. So this process takes 60 days and you're under constant monitoring. So we are
Hmm.
constantly monitoring a couple of different key factors inside of the vessel, which when we go into like the process, we can kind of talk about. But essentially, we are really closely monitoring a person for 60 to 90 days. And so for us to be able to compensate our staff fairly, it's another difficulty within the industry. A lot of people feel underpaid. We work first responder hours.
Oh,
We really
wow.
do. We go, I mean, if somebody dies, we're the people who go get them. If it's a holiday or 2 a.m. or, we were on vacation, but we had to come back because somebody got sick. We are an all or nothing industry. So for me, for us to be able to fairly compensate our team, oh, I'm so
You're okay.
sorry.
No, you're okay. No big deal.
Do
It's
you want
not
me
a
to
problem.
put her outside real
Oh,
quick?
you're fine. Whatever you want to do. It's not that big of a
She
deal.
will continue. So just
Okay.
one moment.
Okay. You're good.
It's
Not a
usually not too
problem.
bad in the morning, but I think it was the post office guy.
No worries.
I can just start from where I was though.
That's fine.
For me to be able to fairly compensate our team is a really huge focus. We want to treat our people extremely well, and we want to kind of set a standard in our industry for being able to compensate our team for the amount of work that they put into the job. So I don't see the prices maybe dropping drastically. I do know that one of our competitors actually already raised their prices. So
Mm.
I don't know what it looks like in the future, but for now, we think where we're priced is super fair to both family and our staff.
The news articles that are out on your organization are they talk really well about the operation that you're running there. And I thought it was really unique that you let families come in while the process is taking place. And that's something that, you don't get with traditional burial. So that has to help these families that are grieving, because you get to be around your family. I think one of the articles mentioned that they can pray, they can bring music in and stuff like that. So that's really unique and a new experience for people nowadays.
I used to feel like, what I was discussing earlier at on Thanksgiving and somebody dies at your table and everybody's freaking out and we show up and we just kind of take the person away, right? And then do you see them again? In a lot of cases, you don't because a lot of families are choosing just to go with a cremation because it's cheap. And I feel like that's part of what I wanted to really drive home because when I first started at Return Home, I wasn't overseeing everything. I was just overseeing my section of the company, which was service to families and body care and preparation, right? So for me, being able to kind of blur the lines between what would happen 200 years ago at a home where you would literally clear the family dinner table and lay the body and anoint it and clean it and pray over it and do exactly the ritual you're speaking of. To be able to invite people into a place where they feel comforted because there's professionals around them, but really it's innate to them. It's
Mm.
been extraordinary to see people jump into these roles where we've even had people, especially from California, drive their loved one into
Wow.
Auburn, Washington, which is, it's a very long drive for many. But that's happened more than a handful of times now. And it's because people want to give that final act of love to their person. And they were never given the opportunity before. It's not something funeral professionals like to do. We like to feel like our value is in the actual physical moving of the person. It's less so that than actually just how again, we can kind of be with them emotionally and help them with the paperwork and closing estates. And like we're that kind of resource. And then, of course, the disposition itself. But the physical handling of the body, I love inviting families to participate. And when they do, I think there's a cathartic release of some kind for them that maybe others don't receive because they don't ever see their person again.
It's almost like we're getting back to, our prehistoric age almost. I think about like the Native American community, and I don't know all the traditions that go into burying someone, but watching TV shows and stuff like that, you see that there's definitely a celebration of life almost that takes place. And with traditional ceremonies and burial, we don't do that. It's kind of like everyone's like huffing and puffing for 3 days or a week or whatever to get stuff done, and you never even like come in contact with the body or with your family member. So it's really unique what y'all are doing there.
Thank you. It feels normal to do it, but at first it was not. It goes against everything that I was kind of formed to be and taught to be, but it feels in Armenia, where I have family, they are very hands-on with their death care there, and so I feel like it's in my blood to be able to come and to offer this to people as an opportunity to really leave a meaningful goodbye behind and love their person longer than they were going to previously. It feels good to do that.
Yeah, these people are probably unlocking doors and opening windows in their brains that they've never experienced before. It's almost like, I don't know if you hunt at all. Do
I
you hunt?
do.
Yeah.
I'm
So
from Montana, born and raised.
okay, perfect. So like hunting is kind of like this primal thing that not a lot of people experience these days. Even like going to a ranch or a farm, no one really knows where their animal or their meat comes from. They just buy it at a store and it gets on the table. So they're kind of disconnected from this whole other aspect of food. And I think it's similar to death.
I could not agree more. Actually, that's something I talk about a lot is that my growing up on a ranch and being exposed to that lifestyle at a really young age exposed me in a really great way to life and death and the circle of life and the normalcy of the loss happening because it's just inevitable for everybody. And so for me, I feel like I was on the right track from a really young age to do exactly what I'm doing right now.
That's beautiful. So can you talk about the process? Because I've read and I've heard from other folks that the process of natural organic reduction, or what did you call it, is terramation?
Yeah, yeah. So natural organic reduction is the legal term for the process.
Okay.
We call it terramation at our facility just because we feel like it's kind of then a little bit more palatable than human composting. It's
Mm,
kind of hard to speak with someone who just lost someone and be like, I'm going to compost your person. And like they know I'm going to do that,
right.
but they also know that I used to incinerate their person, but I never called it that.
Right.
So for us, it was important to give it some panache, just a little bit of like an ease to the actual terminology. But natural organic reduction perfectly works. It's just kind of wordy.
Okay. No, agreed. It's a mouthful. So I read and heard from other folks that it could take possibly a year to complete the process, but you said like 90 days.
So it totally depends. What's really interesting, incredible, also a little bit terrifying about this service right now is that as states are legalizing, they're setting laws in place for things like reaching minimum temperatures for
Mm,
compost pathogens to become inert and, quantifying different levels of heavy metals or making sure the bone is completely integrated. But they don't really tell you how to do it, right?
mm,
So what we're running into is companies like Return Home, where we're kind of in a warehouse and we have really optimized science and we're constantly running, a cloud 24/7. We are watching these people like a hawk. And because of that, we're able to make little tweaks. So maybe at the beginning we took 90 days. We're actually a lot closer to 60 days now.
whoa.
Because we're able to modify the airflow. We're able to make sure that people are where they need to be all the time. There are other facilities that exist in the space that are outside. They're literally outdoors. So that means in the winter time, that body is not the same temperature as it is in the summertime. It's dropping in heat massively. So they're sitting maybe not even, they're in an anaerobic state for a couple months. For us, it was very important that we were able to give families their loved ones remains in a timeful manner because 60 days is already quite long when you begin to consider it. It's not long once we really break it down for families. They actually think it's fast. You break down a body in 60 days, it's incredible.
Yeah.
But compared to what they're used to, like you mentioned before, having a service within 3 days or a week, it's quite different. So for us, it was important to try to just continue to optimize and get better and better at returning people home sooner. But literally, some people just don't care, and that is their business, and the families that go to them also don't care, and they're out in the wilderness, out under the stars, and that really does appeal to some people. And I think that for us, we just want to make sure that the body's always aerobic.
Right.
There's always oxygen moving. There's never any, too much water, too much air. Everything's always equally balanced. And when that happens, the body really does pretty miraculously break down. It's extraordinary to see.
I bet it's wild. I can't even 60 days. It seems like a very short amount of time for a human body just to turn into soil. So what all goes into the process? Like, how do you do this?
Yeah. So what we do is we take a vessel. It's like 8 foot by 3.5 by 3.5. So it's kind of a big rectangle. What we do is there's oxygen inputs and outputs. So there's inputs at the bottom and off gassing and outputs at the top because everything rises. What we do is place straw, alfalfa, and sawdust mixed together with water at a certain ratio on the bottom of the vessel. We place the person's body right on top, and usually we kind of make them a cradle and give them a pillow and get them all kind of snuggied in there. And then everybody is before that bathed and dressed in a compostable garment. So everybody's kind of covered, lots of dignity to what we do back there. And then we place the remaining organic material on top. So they're kind of sandwiched and snuggied between two layers of those organics. And we close the lid and we hook them up to an oxygen system that it's interesting because what happens is the alfalfa is nitrogen rich, and so the microbes inside of the body with that alfalfa really work together in a really harmonious way to raise the temperature of the vessel and raise the temperature inside. When that happens, it's like a fire. You have to get it started, but once you get it started, all you have to do is let it do its thing, and it pulls oxygen in itself. Our process does that. There's very few cases where we've had to actually add oxygen in. And when we do, it's the same apparatus that you use to fill up an air mattress.
Okay.
We literally just hook that up for like 15 minutes. And, so the input of the energy super, super low. And then what happens is as the oxygen flows through the vessel, those microbes become super hyperactive. They become one with the organics around them. So the person begins to break down and transform. And during that time, the soil or the straw, alfalfa, and sawdust are also breaking down in their own way and becoming organically, decomposed in their own way as well. What we will notice is when the temperature rises and we get to the state minimums, which we just blow out of the water. We do, about 160 degrees for anywhere from 2 weeks to 21 days.
Holy cow.
What we see
Wow.
when the temperature drops, we know that the organics that are surrounding the body have kind of used up all the energy they had and they're decomposed. So we go to an external rotator that hugs that vessel. It just holds it and rotates it. And very slowly, about 15 rotations, and it equalizes all of that moisture inside of the vessel. We go back, we place them back on the racking system. The temperature spiked back up because those organics are exposed again. And then we do that until we don't see a spike anymore.
That is wild. So about how many times do you have to do that rotate process?
3,
Really?
roughly.
Gosh, that's so fast. It's just fascinating to I'm trying to picture it in my mind how it all works. So what made y'all to decide to go with sawdust and like that material? Was that like scientifically like that's what's going to help break down the body?
You got it. So
Mhm.
what's really cool about what we're doing is when Washington legalized the process to take place, they again didn't give us any instruction. And so Micah, the CEO at our company, hired a gentleman out of British Columbia. He is what's called a mortality composter. Mortality composters are they're a red state play. They're for ranchers mostly, people with herds and flocks and groupings of animals. Where if something happens to those animals and they have to be put down because of disease or there's a terrible tornado and a bunch of them die or just something happens, right? They will come, these mortality composters, and set up temporary facilities on these ranches where they will actually transform the animal remains into compost for that rancher to use on his property. So this technology has existed for a very long time. But what we did is we went to British Columbia and practiced on pigs inside of individual vessels. Because when you first bring this up to a mortality composter for humans, they're like, oh, of course, we'll just stack them 10 high and cover them in chicken poop because it's got a lot of nitrogen in it and just let them go. And you're reverence. So, okay, let's try again. We're going to grind them up into toothpaste and then just mix them with sawdust. So there was like a real learning curve to the care and respect and love that we give people when we serve them in the funeral home, and the science that was really, really not refined and kind of rough and being used in a way that was in bulk, in mass. That was actually one of the original ideas, was a big silo in the middle of Seattle where we just pile bodies up. That was
Holy
kind
cow.
of the original idea of composting. So we took these things. We know that they're not reverent. We care very much about the way that we treat both the families that we serve and the person who's at their most vulnerable, who cannot defend themselves. So 2.5 years later, we finally opened to serve families. It took us 2.5 years of research and development, testing on pigs to perfect the process. And when I say perfect, I mean as good as it could be at that time, but we've even done more since then. So, um, yeah, we have kind of an Ocean's Eleven's team, right?
Mm.
It's Micah who does business and finance, and he's our CEO, and he's an incredible leader. And then you have John Paul, who's our soil scientist. He's a PhD and expert. We have Courtney, who built all of our systems as far as the construction inside of the facility to make sure that we could facilitate. We have 74 vessels, so she coordinated all of that. And then, people like myself and Katie, who's our services director, who we are licensed funeral professionals who know how to handle people. And that's the same with Chris and James in the back of house. They're funeral professionals. So once the systems and the facilities are built, you're just a bunch of funeral directors who knew how to burn and embalm bodies, and now you're having to transform people into compost. So
Are there, like, when you get a body in that, let's say they died from cancer, is there any concern about that during the process, or someone having a disease or anything like that? Do y'all take any precautions, or what do y'all, how do y'all handle stuff like that?
yeah, for sure. It's a great question. We take a lot of precautions as far as doing research with the family to make sure, we ask them about radiation and chemotherapy. We ask them about implants and things of that like. And then what's pretty prevalent inside of the funeral industry is knowledge that prion related diseases really are handled with cremation only. It's because it kills that prion, and that is a very dangerous and contagious uh, disease to have. And so, what we do is if the person has a prion, we would suggest them for alkaline hydrolysis or cremation. We
Mm.
cannot help those families. But outside of that, aside from waiting for like radiation half life to fall out, which is usually only 72 hours, it doesn't take long. We because the temperatures rise to the place that they do, we don't have to worry about pathogens or
Mm.
heavy metals being released into the compost because everything will become inert. And then what we do is after that first phase of our process, we go to a screening room where we then remove the metal implants and silicone implants that people don't tell us about.
Yeah.
And that's when we also use machinery that breaks the bone down to become uniform with the compost. So all of that happens. So when we go to screening, we also take a test to the state, and we have to be tested for, X amount of soil samples via the state, and they have to go through a third party to make sure that there's no bias. And they test us for things like salmonella, fecal coliform, again, heavy metals, and we've passed with flying colors. So the temperatures in the vessels don't allow for those types of things to survive. And then to back that, we get it tested just to make sure that we're in the clear before we return people home to their loved one.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about breast implants and stuff, but y'all have a second process after it's already started
Yes.
to remove all that stuff. What about tattoos? People that are heavily tatted, does that mess
Not a
with anything?
problem.
Really?
No, we like them actually. It's like one of my favorite things is when somebody's on my table just really looking and thinking about how they got them and, talking to them about them. So
Yeah.
yeah, we love tattoos.
Wow. So does the facility have a stench to it, or is it vinula? Or
Great question. Wow, you got these
yeah,
questions. No, don't you? So when that person is hooked up to that oxygen system, really they're just off gassing into what we call the octopus. We call it that because it's got a bunch of arms, and each of those arms go to a vessel and connect, and that's how we're able to maintain an odorless facility. But then what happens is back behind the facility, we have a giant biofilter that is full of wood chips that are covered in
yeah,
chicken poop.
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
okay. So they're nitrogen, right? So what happens is that odorous smell goes through that those wood chips and that biofilter, and the nitrogen actually eats up that odorous particle. And so what we
Hmm.
do is we have to change those out every 5 years. We've not yet run into having to do that. But essentially, as long as that thing is full of those wood chips that still have nitrogen on them, we're able to maintain an odorless facility inside and outside.
That is wild.
And
Gosh.
that was also created by those mortality composters. So, yeah, shout
Wow.
out to John Paul.
Heck yeah, I want this John Paul guy, man. You gotta be
He's
rich.
amazing.
You gotta be rich by now. Um, has there ever been a time where a body just wouldn't decompose?
No, we have had a great deal of success. And it's an interesting question because we didn't know in some cases. We've had to have some really hard conversations with, for instance, parents
Hmm.
where we haven't done a child yet. We don't know. And we want to be able to confidently serve you, but we are going to let you know that if this is something that you don't decide to do because we can't give you the answer, we understand that. And people try. They
Yeah.
just do because it's so cool to receive back soil that you can see your loved one's life live on in. So yeah, we've had to have those hard conversations, but we've never not had it work. We have had a great deal of success to the point where we actually now have little mini vessels, and we think that children specifically, this can be healing to the family because it's so unnatural. It's not the natural order of things for a child to die.
Hmm.
So to be able to take something home that you can run your hands through, your animals recognize the scent, you're able to place them in a meaningful spot. You can put them in an urn still on your mantle. You can still have that if you need it.
Hmm.
That to us has been really transformative, and we don't charge for children. So we just do it as a service to families who lose kids.
That's beautiful. You're in such an interesting line of work where you're providing a really good service, and on one side of the coin you must feel really good, but it's got to be tough just being around death all the time. Is that tough for you mentally?
People ask that, and I think that we all have seasons as funeral professionals. I think sometimes we're strong and have a lot of fortitude and we can get through and we're mentally well.
Hmm.
And I think there's other times that you go through and you realize what you're doing And especially with us, there's this really weird juxtaposition between like our social media presence and how we try to be a little goofy and just try to bring people comfort in a way that they know that the people who are delivering the message both care and understand that you have grief and want to lighten your spirit and let you know that you have a community. So there's a lot of this like just juxtaposition where sometimes I think every funeral professional will just like cry in a room by themselves,
Yeah.
because I think that's just the case. But we don't have a ton of resources. We have one association that is national that provides grief resources for funeral professionals. But yeah, like I think about that a lot. I think about the mental well-being of our industry, and it's not great all the time. I mean, it's definitely hard to do. And the hardest part is those ones that stay with you.
Mm.
So like I've got a list of names in my head like Arya Stark, like I
Whew.
have this list of all these dead people in my head. And yeah, I'll never forget any of them. I'll never forget their families. I'll never forget what they looked like, and they just stick with you. So I don't know what that says about the mental health of the industry, but I know I'm not the only person that has that list. So
I feel an energy, just I can imagine the energy that you put off in person, and I feel like a very positive vibration from you. And I can imagine, or I can't imagine, like doing what you're doing with the kids. I think I would be okay with adults. But I think kids, man, that would tear me up. I don't know if I could, like, just getting emotional just thinking about it right now.
it's a deal
It's,
breaker for
yeah,
a lot of people.
it's tough.
Yeah.
So how long, so how much soil would, a 5'7", 180 pound guy get back?
I would say probably about 200 pounds,
Oh,
200 to
wow.
250, because we do put the bulking agent in at a higher ratio to the body weight of the
Mm.
person. So after the breakdown of the body, really all that's left is the bulking agent plus a little moisture, and then we dry it down before we return it to the family. So I would say about 200 pounds. And then what we do is it's imperative that that compost continue to breathe. We are continuing the cycle of life. So we put people in burlap because it's porous and it allows
Mm.
for the compost to continue to off gas. And it would be about 10, 20 pound bags. And we've
Wow.
fit all that into the back of a Honda Fit before. So it sounds like a lot, but it's not really unmanageable.
Yeah, no, that's more than I thought that they would do. So people can go home and put the compost in gardens and flowers. They could plant trees. Like it's legit. It's probably like the best compost that you could possibly get.
It's super nutrient dense. It's got all the stuff the earth loves, like magnesium and phosphates and potassium and even carbon. You want to put it back into the soil. So it's pretty extraordinary when people will have like the service after we've returned their loved one home, and then 6 months later they'll send us a picture, or they've given us soil to add to one of our many plants that we have, and we get to see their loved one's life live on. We have plants that are named the people. So like we
Oh
have an
wow,
Andrew and
that's awesome.
in our office just Andrew hangs out. Like sometimes we have to water Andrew and like so that's been really interesting. And then of course, we have families who have ranch property. They have a big house and they want, like, for instance, one of them planted a barrier wall of trees
Mm.
on the exposed side of their property, and their father is going to grow into a protective wall over their home. I mean,
Oh,
I still get goosebumps when I talk about it because it's the most beautiful thing. And they have a memorial marker there. They have a big stone and it's engraved and it's beautiful but natural. Um, so, people can take the full amount and do an entire memorial like that. We've seen people go to arboretums. We have a couple arboretums in Washington State that allow for memorialization. So, gardens, of course, at home, and if you've got the property, plants indoors, anything that could benefit from soil and like a soil amendment will benefit from the compost and grow like crazy, quite frankly. And after this, I'd love to get your address and send you a little compost pack, and it's got piggy compost in it.
oh wow.
But then you can test it and you can see for yourself because I see a plant. I see a plant
Oh
back
yeah,
there.
no, we got a garden in the back too, so we're actually doing
Beautiful.
our own little compost pile too. So I bet your
Yes.
garden. Do you have a garden?
Do I?
I bet your
I
garden
do.
is just amazing, isn't it?
I have a lot of fun. My property now is less so because I've live in a city.
Hmm.
But certainly, yeah, throughout my entire life, my family has been very much into gardening and agriculture and feeding our family from our own resources and things like that. So.
Have y'all collaborated with farmers around? I don't know how many farmers are in Washington, but from other states, have they reached out to you to help improve their soil and soil amendments and
Yes.
stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, we get reached out to a lot for like, can I buy your soil or your compost? What's really beautiful about what we do is the family chooses to receive the full amount of the compost. And then if they don't want it, we take it to an area just about 10 to 15 minutes north of where our facility is located. And it's a certified green belt, which
Hmm.
means it can never be developed upon in perpetuity. And that's a state, standard. They set it in place and, or county, I can't remember, but it's like government regulated where, it's at kind of the top of a hill, and we go place the remains there if a family only wants like an urn-sized amount. But it's donated to an area that was in desperate need of the restoration, and we're seeing new flora and fauna kind of joining the party up there. So it's been really amazing to see how transformative that area has become already. But we would never sell remains.
Right.
Not ever. It's just, I don't even know how that would even register in someone's brain that they could call and ask about it, but they do. They
Yeah.
definitely do.
Well, I mean the word sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, whatever word you want to use, it's becoming a big thing, and this plays in very well with the mission of sustainability. So
We just know the soil health of our planet is depleting at a pretty rapid clip, right? Because you kind of mentioned it earlier, where when we used to die and just die and go back into the earth kind of raw, and someone would just die in the woods randomly, and they never saw him again, but the earth got to receive that person. We also used to use the restroom. We used to poop in the woods. You know what I
mhm.
mean? And like return organic matter to the earth all the time, and that was millions and billions or however many people doing it. And then we stopped and sewage systems became a thing, and burying people with embalming fluid in a casket in an outer burial container in an upkept park, and these things kind of have taken place. So we know soil health is just, it's our number one mission. It's to be able to restore some of the loss that has taken place on this planet.
Yeah, there's some experts that estimate that by 2040 or 2050, our soil was gonna like we're not gonna be able to farm anymore. I don't know
It's
how much,
scary.
I don't know how accurate that is, but that's really scary, especially for my
Hmm.
kids. I worry about stuff like that. Since I've had the podcast, I've been able to talk to a lot of regenerative farmers and ranchers, and they say kind of the same thing. And a wild statistic that I heard is like 99% of Americans have never been on a farm, which is
Oh, I didn't
crazy.
know that. Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
I don't know why I'm laughing. That was like a nervous laugh because that is not a like, wow.
Yeah,
Ooh,
that's one of. Have you heard of Forces of Nature meat?
no.
I always talk about this, but uh, the guy that owns it, him and his wife own this company. They have a ranch in Fredericksburg, Texas, and it's called Rome Ranch. But they own this company called Forces of Nature Meat, and they sell regenerative meat. So from their ranch, they have bison, they have cows, and they partner with other ranches too, other sustainable ranches. And he's the one that said that statistic, which is crazy because I was like, oh, well, I've been around it. Just thought everyone was like near agricultural a little bit, but to know that no one really knows a farmer is kind of wild.
That's crazy to me. I'm gonna look into that for
Yeah.
sure.
Have you, or I guess, what's the perception like from other states? Are other states wanting to pick it up? I think right now this is legal, and it's stupid even saying that. Like it's legal in 6 states. Is that still accurate? And what does the perception from other states look like?
Yeah, that's accurate. Right now, there's six. We have a web page that kind of keeps up with the legislation in different areas, and right now there are several bills introduced in other states as well. What's pretty extraordinary about this is that it's seeing a really rapid clip as opposed to, maybe cremation, when back in the 60s is when it kind of started to actually become prevalent. But before that, really wasn't that frequent that people were cremated. And then over time, the frequency has increased. We'll probably see a similar progression over time of this being available to states, but it's been quick. So 2019 is when it was originally legalized in Washington. Oregon and Colorado were quick to jump behind that. And then Vermont, California, and New York are all
Hmm.
legal. And it is funny to say legal, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because, they do monitor how we care and dispose of bodies. That's something that's very important to each state individually. But it is kind of wild that it's each state has their own laws and regulations, and that does dictate the progression of this kind of thing spreading. No pun intended. But yeah, ultimately, we are huge on TikTok. We have over 600,000 followers, which to me is like
that's
as
a lot.
massive as I could have imagined. I was really excited when we got 30,000. I was like, this is this, like we did it. So we have people and they're from all over the United States, really all over the world constantly. How do I get this in my area? How do I do it? We send them to returnhome.com/ I'd rather be compost. You can download a legislation letter there and send it to your local legislators. You can send requesting a sponsor. So, we're really excited about our role in the movement because we're going to the people. We're not lobbying. We're going to the people and saying, if you want this in your area, let's fight for it together. And that's been really fun. And yeah, we definitely had an impact in California and New York most recently, definitely.
That's great. What is the status of Texas? Do you know where Texas lands at that?
Texas is going to be a little bit of a tough push, right? There's two reasons, and this is come some like insider info. But one reason is, of course, because it's quite conservative, and a lot of people who are maybe more traditional or trepidatious about this type of service. But we do get a ton of inquiries from Texas. The other thing is one of the largest national companies. They're called SCI, Service Corporation International. They are located in Houston. That's where their
Hmm.
base is. They run tens of thousands of funeral homes, at least 10,000. They have to. They go in and when older people whose children maybe didn't want to continue the business, they'll purchase their small town and just keep the firm running. But essentially, they are in Houston. So until they're on board, I don't know what the politics look like there, but I think they have a lot of push and say in kind of what happens in the death care space in Texas, at least. I get that inclination. I might be wrong, but
Isn't that
that's my,
wild? Like it's unless they get on board with doing it this way, then that's probably not going to happen for a very long time, huh?
it might not.
That's
Yeah. And
wild.
that's why, yeah, people actually, that's why people send their loved ones to us. So most of the time when you are a funeral provider, you serve your local area. It's pretty much how it's always been, right? You die in an area, you're cremated or buried in that area. Maybe you're shipped somewhere else for burial, but usually, like, you're kind of within this geographical range of about 50 miles, roughly. Return Home's really unique because we serve people from all over the US because they
Hmm.
see us on TikTok and then they somebody passes away unexpectedly and they call us and we're white gloves, so we help them coordinate every single step. They don't really have to do a lot more than if they even were just in Washington. But it's about sending your person a long way, and we don't like that. We don't like that people have to do it, but we are flattered that people want to do it because we know that we will give them the best service they could possibly get for this specific disposition method.
Yeah, no, this is once I learned about it, I'm on board. I was on board with cremation, but I realized how much cremation impacts the environment and fossil fuels and how and I didn't know that. It's something I wasn't aware. I just thought it was quick and the most effective, but since then I've been schooled.
It's a lot of energy. And then, I think something that people don't think a lot about, but I do, of course, and that's the operator,
Hmm.
right? Like, will I ever unsee and unsmell some of the things that I saw and smelled in that crematory? I don't know, So
Hmm.
I think that cremation is rough. I think it's super fast and aggressive, and it never really completely settled well with me, but I did 3 or 4 a day most days because that was just my job and that's what I was used to doing. And when I was stepped back and was able to kind of like pull back the veil on the work that I was doing, it revealed itself as both extremely wasteful
Hmm.
and not great on my mental health. And that for that reason is why I'm so grateful to be able to really lead a charge for better care for our staff in this industry. It really means everything to me.
Well, y'all are doing a great work. How can people follow you all on social media? Y'all on Instagram? You said TikTok, Facebook, and
Yeah,
all that.
Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, keeping it old school. Everywhere you go, we're at Return Home NOR for Natural Organic Reduction. And we've recently started YouTube as well, just trying to do a little bit more long form for reasons like this. People have a lot of questions. So being
Absolutely.
able to talk to you today was wonderful. And we're really grateful for the opportunity to spread our message. So
No, absolutely. I love everything that y'all are doing. I love when I get to read news stories about everything that you have going on at Return Home, and I'm fascinated, and I'm a big fan. So
that's so nice. And if you're ever in Seattle, you have to come visit. You really do,
I,
because we love showing people how there can be somebody decomposing inches away from you and you don't even really notice. It's
right.
just part of the atmosphere that we create. And it's really very interesting to be a part of. So
Absolutely, will do. I'll take you up on that offer. Well, thank you,
awesome.
Bree. This has been real fun. Like I said, this will come out in a couple weeks. I'll send you all the details over email and all the links and that again. So
Right
awesome.
on.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time, and I hope you have a great day.
Yeah. Hey, you too.
All
Thank
right.
you,
Bye
Jonathan.
bye.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.